He said it like a landlord, not a son. Either cook for my wife or get out. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I reached for my purse, smoothed the wrinkle in my sleeve, and walked out of the apartment I paid for. The door clicked behind me, soft, almost polite. Funny how disrespect can arrive wrapped in manners. In the hallway, my hands still burned from the grocery bags I'd carried up 3 flights. Red grooves, little trophies of a woman who's done too much for too long. Outside, the early evening air tasted clean. I sat in my car and watched the window where I used to make dinner, used to forgive, used to pretend. Not tonight. Tonight, I decided to stop mistaking love for access. At a quiet room with a thinner pillow and thicker silence. I opened my tablet. One page glowed payments I'd set up just to help until they could get on their feet. Rent, phones, cards, all those tiny leaks you don't notice until you drown. My finger hovered, then pressed, stop, remove, revoke. Each confirmation ding felt like a loose chain hitting the floor. The next morning, the world looked the same. Coffee steam, traffic hum, strangers holding doors, but something in me had been returned to its rightful owner. Dignity doesn't slam, it simply closes and locks. By Thursday, the calls began, first curious, then irritated, then frightened. A week later, my phone lit up with 18 missed calls, and that was before the knocks, before the stories they told about me before the town started asking its own questions. People think the loudest person controls the story. They don't. Paperwork does, timelines do. So does the truth when you stop paying for the lie that hides it. He said cook or get out. I chose a third option, walk out, and take the floorboards with me. The nail polish hit first sweet chemical pink as bubblegum spilling over the kitchen I scrubbed for years. At my table sat Sabine Crowell, my daughter-in-law, heels planted on a chair, my pension paid for. She didn't look up. Make me a sandwich. I set down the groceries lines carved across my fingers from the climb. Excuse me, a lazy flick of her wrist, turkey, the good kind. In that moment, I introduce myself to you properly. I'm Thora Quinlan, a mother, a widow, and the woman who's been covering this household while 2 healthy adults figure things out. There are seasons for compromise. This wasn't one of them. I folded the receipt, slid it into my pocket, and looked around the room I'd kept running, rent lights, phones, little treats I skipped so others didn't have to. I'll pack, I said. Her smirk faltered. Small sound, big shift. Some women slam doors. I prefer turning keys very slowly so the silence tells the story. The suitcase came down like a verdict zipper teeth, catching on old vacation stickers from a life that fit better. As I rolled socks, the ledger unrolled too. 8 months of rent, utilities, groceries, phone lines that were never in my hand. Kier holiday. My son once brought me dandelions and drawings. Lately, he brought excuses and a look that asked me to disappear into my own kitchen. It's strange what you remember when you fold shirts, dollar amounts. Due dates the exact way disappointment sounds when you pretend not to hear it. I placed my late husband's photo in a side pocket and paused. Love is a promise. Enabling is a leak. I'd been patching the boat, not noticing who kept drilling holes. By the time I tugged the zipper shut, I wasn't packing clothes. I was packing boundaries. The hallway felt shorter on the way out. The door didn't slam. It clicked soft, definite, like a safe closing around something I meant to keep. Sunset Manor wasn't home. It was neutral ground. A bed, a lamp with a shade 2 sizes too small, and a window facing a parking lot that glittered with other people's lives. I set my purse down, breath slow, hands steady, and opened my tablet. Names, dates, auto payments blinked back at me like tiny, friendly thieves. I made a list with my morning coffee, rent, draft utility, bridge phone bundle. 2 credit cards with authorized user riders I'd added on hopeful days. Older folks will know the feeling. It's just until they get their footing. But time turns until into always and help into habit. I whispered a prayer for courage, then gave my courage. Tasks cancel, remove, revoke, confirm. I practiced the words out loud, smoothing my voice for the customer service menus. Between page taps, I felt something return, like circulation in a limb you'd been sitting on. Numb first, then pins, then life. Tomorrow, I told myself the leak stops. Mornings smelled like diner coffee and pencil shavings. I dialed Valley National Bank and waited through the symphony of Press 1. "Good morning, how may we assist?" the rep asked. "I need to halt an automatic rent transfer immediately." My case numbers lined the page like guardrails. "We confirmed account endings, dates, authorizations." She paused. 8 months on file. "Are you sure?" I smiled into the receiver. "I'm sure. A few older listeners will understand the relief you say." A firm sentence, and suddenly your back stands up on its own. "You'll receive a confirmation within 24 hours. A soft chime on my tablet. "Email transfer canceled." The sound was small, but the room felt larger. Outside, a delivery truck coughed. A bird argued with a wire. Normal life continued unconcerned. Inside, a link snapped the kind you only notice once it's gone. I wrote the confirmation code, underlined it twice, and drew a box around the word I'd been avoiding. Enough. Next, the family plan, my name, their numbers. The carrier's hold music was chipper like a commercial pretending bills don't arrive. "How can I help?" "Please remove 2 lines from my account effective today." We verified birthdays, pins, and addresses everyone used but never paid for. "They'll need new service," the agent said, carefully neutral. "Yes," I answered, "they will." She read disclosures. I read them back. "There's a rhythm to taking your life back. Measure twice, cut once, save the receipts." I pictured 100 small calls over the years. "Mind covering this, will pay you next week. It's just this month. If you're in your 60s, you've heard that chorus." Today, I changed the song. The agent thanked me for my patience. I thanked her for the record. When the final line disconnected, my phone felt lighter, in my palm as if contracts have weight. Maybe they do? Maybe promises do too, especially the ones you keep to yourself. Credit cards were last 2 accounts, with authorized user status for emergencies that bred emergencies. "Remove the secondary user," I told the Visa representative, reading the digits slow and clear. "We'll keep prior charges on your responsibility, but there will be no further access," she said. "Understood." She gave a reference number. I wrote it, then wrote it again, because paper remembers when people don't. I pictured a scene many parents know: a checkout line. A hopeful face, the soft math of love, covering what budgets can't. That math failed me. I'd been paying interest on denial. When the rep asked, "Anything else?" I surprised us both. "Yes, please mail me a fresh card with a new number." A pause, respectful. "I can do that." The moment clicked, not punitive, protective. Not anger, clarity. I hung up and looked at my notes, ink smudged by a coffee ring, and a steadier hand than yesterday. Somewhere a door had opened. Somewhere a lock engaged. I'm a waitress by trade and a record keeper by survival. That afternoon, I opened a fresh folder and typed Sabine Crowell evidence. Date, time, location, amount, witness. I added a cloud backup because hard drives fail, and so do memories when grief knocks. The goal wasn't revenge. It was reality with timestamps. A lifetime of shifts taught me patterns: who tips, who talks, who tries to test the house rules. This too formed a pattern. Money out, respect, down, stories up. I sketched a simple timeline, moving in temporarily. Rent coverage for a month, phone lines just in case, then the little luxuries that somehow skipped me, but never them. I printed the list and slid it into a manila envelope with a clip that snapped shut like a jaw. Proof is merciful. It keeps you from debating yourself at 2 a.m. It keeps you from forgetting what happened when someone else insists it didn't. Old haunts tell the truth. At Miller's Diner, the chrome still gleamed and the coffee still tasted like the 90s. Rhea Donnelly, my former coworker, waved me over with a look that meant news. "You didn't hear it from me," she began, meaning I would thoroughly, but there was a pricey cosmetics return at Peterson's. "Paid with a card in your name. Cash back." The fork paused halfway. "Mine." She nodded, cheeks pink with the effort of kindness. "My grandson handled the transaction. He thought it was off." The room tilted an inch, then steadied. I'd once believed theft wears a mask. Turns out it wears lip gloss. Older friends will recognize that sting. It's not the money, though that matters. It's the decision made behind your back, in a store that still carries your favorite gum. I thanked Rhea, paid for both coffees, and walked out into air that felt thinner and sharper like the truth when it first arrives. Back at Sunset Manor, I spread bank statements across the table, like maps of a country I apparently financed. Line by line, the charges matched Rhea Donnelly's story: high-end items, then reversals, then cash. The amounts weren't life-ruining, but they were soul-telling. I wrote 3 words at the top of the page: not helping stealing. If you've ever cleaned out a junk drawer, you know the relief of throwing away the thing you kept just in case. I felt that only harder, heavier. I circled dates, connected arrows, and added questions in the margins. Who knew how long? What else? The answers would come, and when they did, I didn't want them crashing into fog. I took photos of each sheet, uploaded them to the cloud, and sealed the originals in that envelope with the bite-tight clip. When I finally looked up, the room had changed. No, I had. The floor felt level again, and my breath landed where I put it. The Millfield Police Department lobby smelled like copier toner and floor cleaner, comforting in a bureaucratic way. Officer Theo March greeted me with the patience of a man who has seen long stories and longer sighs. Credit card fraud, I said, handing over copies of statements and a summary I'd typed in 14-point font because clarity is kindness. He asked simple questions. I gave simple answers. Dates, totals, stores. The word permission never appeared. He stamped the intake the way you stamp dough before it rises and promised a case number by end of day. Maybe you've put off a hard appointment. Doctor, dentist, the talk with your grown child. You know the exhale when it's finally scheduled. On my way out, I caught my reflection in the glass. Same cardigan, same lines, different posture. I texted myself the case number so it couldn't wander off a sticky note. Paper can be lost. Phones can be found. Today, I chose both. Down the hall, Detective Delaney Kincaid of Financial Crimes shook my hand like we were starting a project together, which in a way we were. She'd seen this pattern: buy high return, fast convert to cash. Most retailers hold video for 90 days, she said, tapping her pen on the dates I'd highlighted. We'll request footage. Her calm steadied mine. We discussed thresholds, timelines, and what would happen if more charges surfaced. If you recall anything else, text me, she added, sliding a card across the table. I logged her number under keep. Seniors sometimes get told they're naive. I prefer the word generous. Today, my generosity wore a badge and a blister-proof pair of shoes. We agreed on next steps. As I left, a young couple argued softly by the permit window. Exhaustion in every syllable. I recognized the tone. I'd funded that tone. Not anymore, I told myself, and stepped back into afternoon light that didn't flinch. That night, my phone stacked messages like plates after a church potluck. First, Keir Holiday, puzzled and polite. Is there a problem with the rent? Then Sabine Crowell, brisk and irritated. Phones are down. Fix it. By message 9, the edges sharpened. By 12, panic had a tremor. I didn't respond. I wrote time codes and summaries in my notebook, the same way I used to record table orders during Friday rush. Patterns again minimize demand, accuse plead. Toward midnight, silence arrived, heavy, instructive. If you've raised a family, you know the urge to rush in with a mop and a checkbook. I poured tea instead and let the tea do nothing. In the morning, I saved the recordings to the evidence folder and labeled them by tone, not just date. Names can lie, voices rarely do. Outside my window, the parking lot glimmered. Inside my chest, a steadier light came on and stayed. Voicemails stacked up while the mug warmed my hands. I numbered each message and wrote the time beside it, the way I used to mark pickup tickets during Friday rush. Keir Holiday started polite. Just checking on the rent, then edged into urgency. Sabine Crowell went straight to brisk commands, as if tone could fix a disconnected plan. Older folks will know this rhythm first. They don't understand. Then they need it now. I didn't call back. I sipped, listened, and logged. When my pen paused, I thought about every time I softened the world so others wouldn't feel its edges. Not today. The calendar on the wall still showed last month's photo. A lighthouse on a rough coast. It felt right. A light doesn't chase the ship. It holds steady and lets the ship decide. Message 16 arrived while I rinsed the cup. I dried the rim, capped the pen, and turned the page. The next chapter would not write itself. At the store, the bread smelled like childhood, and the cartwheels wobbled like memory. Mrs. Aveline Chu from the church baking committee spotted me by the rye loaves. She's kind, but she's also a bulletin board. "Are you all right, dear?" she asked, squeezing my arm. "I kept it simple. I moved out. They're handling their own bills now." Her eyebrows lifted, then settled into a look older women share when we recognize a boundary finally honored. "People have been wondering," she said softly. "I'll tell them you're fine. It wasn't a threat, it was logistics." In small towns, information travels like cinnamon in the air, quick, warm, and everywhere. We chatted about the bake sale until her eyes flashed with something else. "I always did wonder how they kept that apartment," she murmured. I shrugged, folded the list, and reached for a modest loaf. As she rolled away, I felt the first ripple move through the water. Tides were changing. Back at Miller's Diner, chrome lines still caught the afternoon sun. Nate Arbogast, who took over the place when his father retired, was tallying receipts by the register. Sloan Mercer, the morning manager, slid me a refill before I asked. "We heard pieces," Nate said carefully. "Tell us the rest so we don't repeat nonsense." I gave the Bones 8 months of support, a door closed, without shouting payments I had canceled after too many promises. Sloane's jaw tightened. "They told folks they were doing you a favor, letting you stay." I set the cup down. "Sometimes they did say that." Nate tapped his pen. "Doesn't line up with the math." Older listeners know that sound the moment an adult in the room names reality. We didn't gossip. We compared notes like neighbors watching a storm track on TV. When I stood to leave, Sloane squeezed my hand. "You're not wrong," she said. Outside, the sunlight felt plainer, which is to say, truer. By evening, the murmur had a metronome. At the post office, someone whispered to Rhea Donnelly about living large on part-time wages. At the pharmacy, the clerk mentioned returns and cash. It wasn't a pylon, it was pattern recognition, the way older folks spot a scam call before the second beep. I didn't feed it, but I didn't starve it with silence either. Facts need oxygen too. On my walk home, porch lights blinked on one by one, steady as truths that refused to be dramatic. A neighbor waved, then paused as if remembering something important and new. We've all watched reputations rise and fall over casseroles and choir practice. A story that used to tilt one direction began to level out. By dusk, the air itself seemed undecided, like a jury who suddenly realized numbers don't care who smiles. I unlocked my door, set down the keys, and listened to the quiet decide. Tomorrow would be louder. Outside the bank, Sabine Crowell was talking loudly to anyone waiting for the bus. "She's unstable," I heard the word tossed like a pebble, toward a pond she hoped would ripple. I stepped closer, no rush, no raise in voice. "How's the credit card fraud coming along?" The sentence landed like a dropped tray, small sound, big turn. Heads tilted. Rhea Donnelly had told her grandson's story. The receipts matched. The stores kept cameras. I didn't need to argue. I named the things. Sabine laughed the way people do when their throat is tight. "I don't know what you're talking about." I pointed to the bank door. "They can timestamp withdrawals. The store can timestamp returns. I can timestamp rent I paid." A woman in a bus shelter whispered to a friend. A man pulled out his phone like a referee checking a rule. Sabine's color rose. Mine didn't. When the bus arrived, no one looked at me. They looked at details. We walked inside with the crowd, cool air swallowing the heat. Sabine kept her voice sugary. "She's confused." I set a folded printout on the counter, transaction numbers, circled by a pen older than half the tellers. The manager glanced from paper to calendar, then to me. I kept my face plain the way I do when a complicated order is actually simple eggs toast, not today. "There's video at the store," I added. and a detective requesting it. Someone behind us coughed. It's funny what a cough can do. It can sound like dust, or it can sound like doubt. Sabine backed toward the door with a line I've heard since kindergarten. This isn't over. The manager cleared his throat. Ma'am, would you like a copy of the stamped page, he asked. Yes, please. Outside the day kept shining like it didn't take sides. Inside my purse, the paper stayed warm. Not many cheered. No one needed to. The room had shifted. Back at the table, I turned my notes into a small, tidy storm. Copies of statements. Rhea Donnelly's account in her own words. A loss estimate so modest it felt almost polite. I scanned everything and attached it to an email for Detective Delaney Kincaid's subject line, Consolidated Documentation. Older adults know this drill. Medical records insurance forms the folder you keep under the phone with names and dates that make professionals perk up. I included a timeline with simple verbs paid. Asked, refused, returned. No adjectives necessary. When I hit send, I half expected the room to applaud. It didn't, but my shoulders loosened like someone had finally put the heavy box on the right shelf. A minute later, Kincaid replied with a brief acknowledgement and a case update request for footage filed merchants contacted. I read it twice. Paper writes slowly, systems move slower. But today, both had my back. The send chime still echoed when the next problem arrived. By morning, Sabine Crowell had found a new angle. I was mentally declining, easily influenced, making impulsive choices. It's a script many elders fear, the one where our years become a weapon aimed at us. I didn't chase it around town. I added a line to my timeline. Defamation attempts begin. Then I opened the blinds and let the sun do what it does, prove something exists by lighting it. At the pharmacy, the clerk who knows me by my aspirin brand leaned over. You seem fine to me. At the coffee counter, Nate Arbogast winked. Dementia doesn't usually file paperwork that clean. We laughed, short and grateful. Older listeners will recognize the relief of being known. It beats shouting every time. I folded the printed rumor into my folder like you store a thorn, with the rose it came from. If you save both, you remember what cut you, and what was beautiful anyway. Then my phone buzzed with a familiar name. Keir Holiday, the screen read. He didn't say hello. She's pregnant. We're scared. Can you help? The word hit me like a hymn I used to love. Powerful, familiar, dangerous in the wrong hands. Congratulations, I said evenly. Have Dr. Taylor's office call me with the billing details. I'll help with medical costs directly. Silence, then a stammer. We have privacy laws. Exactly, I answered. They can get your consent and call. Older parents will understand the ache right there. The grandchild hope, the worry, the knowledge that love pays bills, and the wisdom that love pays them to the right place. I didn't accuse. I set a condition only truth could meet. He promised to call back. He didn't. I wrote the time, the words pregnancy claim, and underlined verification pending. Then I set the phone down like a hot pan and let it cool. If there was a baby, I would help. If there was a lie, I already had. The call didn't return. Instead, a text from Keir Holiday. We'll handle it. People say that when the story can't pass a receptionist. I breathed, counted to 8 the waitress's version of prayer, and wrote, no verification received in my notes. This is a hinge moment older adults will recognize. Do you wobble with the spin, or do you keep your feet planted where the floor is? I made tea and watched steam climb like a slow decision. Outside, a neighbor watered petunias with the focus of someone who has learned patience the hard way. I thought of all the times I'd rushed in with a check, a casserole, a bandage made of money. Not this time. I left the space empty so the truth could step into it or not. The kettle clicked off. I poured sat and let the quiet finish its sentence. The next knock would answer more than one question. That afternoon, Cara Juniper from the auto lot called, her voice practicing kindness. I shouldn't say much, but I think you should know there were visits here, looking at cars out of range. Cash talk, quick deals. Older folks know the hint. It's what professionals say. when they're waving red flags without breaking rules. I thanked her and added the note vehicle interest higher than income suggests timing aligned with returns for cash scheme. Patterns don't prove everything, but they point like weather vanes. I pictured the showroom bright lights, brochures, promises, with polished paint, and felt the old tired tug in my stomach. Just this once is a powerful phrase. It builds empires out of other people's savings. I folded Kara's name into the folder with Rhea Donnelly's and exhaled slowly. One more line in ink, one more thread pulled from a sweater that had looked cozy from a distance. The next tug would show more of the shape beneath. Night carries truth differently. In daylight, trouble struts. In the dark, it whispers. The voicemails changed key. Sabine Crowell started it angry. You made us look bad and slid into pleading. We can fix this if you just call. Keir Holiday sounded younger than his years, the way storms make men boys again. I listened, wrote summaries, and saved each file to the evidence folder with the calm of someone who has wiped enough tables to know what clean looks like. Older listeners will understand silence is not weakness. It's clarity on purpose. After the last message, I deleted the backlog from my phone but kept the copies. The screen went blank and stayed that way like a stage after the curtain falls. Outside, a train horn passed through town and kept going. Inside, I rinsed the cup, dried the sink, and turned off the kitchen light. Tomorrow the law would move. Tonight, I let the quiet be my witness. The call from Detective Delaney Kincaid of Financial Crimes came before breakfast. Her voice was steady, the kind professionals use when they've seen every version of messy. Sabine Crowell filed an elder abuse complaint, she said. No evidence. She's trying to create a paper trail. Older adults know that fear, the one where your age is used against you like a blunt tool. I didn't tremble. I opened my notebook. Dates, times, names, document the smear Kincaid advised. We'll log it. I pictured Sabine Crowell rehearsing lines in a mirror, unsteady, confused, manipulated. The words don't fit me, and the people who matter know it. Even so, lies can travel fast when they hitch a ride on pity. I wrote a single line, attempted weaponization of age. Then I drew a box around it and moved on. Some mornings you butter toast, some mornings you armor dignity. The climax arrived as a promise. If she wanted a file, we would give her one, just not the one she hoped for. By noon, Gus Calhoun, the retired officer who runs security at Sunset Manor, tapped my door with 2 knuckles and a calm that meant action. She's been hovering, he said. Sabine Crowell. 10 minutes by the elevator. Camera got it. I pictured the carpeted hallway, the way footsteps turn conspiratorial when they refuse to knock. Gus Calhoun handed me a short incident printout, timestamp, camera angle, duration. You want me to send this to the police? He asked. Yes, I said, and please email me a copy. Older folks will recognize that relief when the world finally believes the version you didn't shout. We stood there a moment, 2 people who've seen trouble try to look like concern. We keep residents safe, he added. That includes from familiar faces. I thanked him and watched him walk back down the hall's shoulders. Squared like a lighthouse that had learned to move. The climax clicked. I had witnesses now and video. The next morning, I carried a manila envelope, thick with order, to the Millfield Police Department. At the counter, Officer Theo March logged the materials, then escorted me to a small room where Detective Delaney Kincaid spread everything out like a map. The timeline, the receipts, Gus Calhoun's footage, the bank copies stamped yesterday. This is clean, she said, pressing a sticky flag beside each anchor date. Clean makes judges comfortable. She outlined the plan with the cadence of someone who wins. Quietly request a restraining order, attach the stalking footage, cross-reference the fraud file. I signed 2 forms and initialed 3. Someone once told me bureaucracy is cold. It didn't feel cold. It felt like a seatbelt. Kincaid slid a packet across the table. We'll file today, she said. Given the threats and the hovering odds are good. The climax arrived as a sentence I could breathe through. Ma'am, you've done everything right. On the walk back, I sat in the Manor's lobby where the sunlight is honest and made calls that older adults know by heart. Tamsin Webb Millfield Credit Union. The receptionist announced before the transfer clicked. I'm updating the contact address for Keir Holiday. I said, steady as a ruler. He no longer resides with me. Please remove my information from his loan records. Tamsin Webb was professional careful. We'll note it, she said, and reach out to him directly. I repeated the process with 2 other agencies, confirming no cross-ownership, no shared assets, no permission to fish in my mailbox. Each call added a brick to the wall between my finances and their choices. It wasn't spite, it was plumbing closing valves, so leaks stopped being mysteries. When I hung up, the lobby clock chimed the quarter hour, a tidy applause only I could hear. The climax was quiet, my name detached from their debt. Afternoon brought a call I placed with a deep breath. First, Elliot Vance, the owner of Mountain Coffee, where Keir Holiday worked. I wasn't out to ruin a job. I was out to steady a narrative. There are rumors, I said. If you hear I'm unstable or unkind, please know I've filed formal reports. I'm fine and I'm finished funding. Elliot Vance paused, then sighed the way good bosses do when the personal walks through the front door. We've sensed turbulence, he admitted. Customers have mentioned Sabine Crowell, trying to return electronics for cash across town. We spoke like neighbors, not accusers, clear limited necessary. Thank you for telling me directly, he said. Reputation matters here. Older listeners will recognize the relief of a fair hearing. I hung up and felt the shop bell in my bones, the way it always rang when the morning regulars arrived. The climax no smear could stick where truth had already been introduced. By late day, Detective Delaney Kincaid called with a tone. You save for good news. You can quantify. Temporary restraining order granted, she said. Service scheduled today. Deputy Cal Morrow will deliver. The phrase served today hit like cool water on a burn, instant clarifying. I wrote the docket number, then underlined it, then wrote it on a sticky note and stuck it to the back of my phone. Older adults keep duplicates because we've lost originals before. Kincaid detailed the perimeter distance requirements. No contact terms, immediate arrest upon violation. You'll get a certified copy, she added. I thanked her and set the kettle on, not because tea fixes anything, but because rituals remind you you're not only what's happening to you. The climax wasn't fireworks. It was paperwork stamped and signed doing what it does best. Turning fear into rules with consequences, the kettle had just started to sing when the phone lit up, unknown number, familiar temper. This isn't over, old lady. I didn't reply. I took a screenshot, saved it to the evidence folder, and forwarded it to Detective Delaney Kincaid with the subject line, post-RO threat. Her response was immediate, received, logged. Older adults know the alchemy of restraint, the way not answering can be louder than shouting. I printed the message and tucked it behind the restraining order copy like a matched set. If Sabine Crowell wanted to audition for consequences, this was her monologue. Outside, a neighbor's wind chimes turned a breeze into music. Inside, the kettle quieted. I poured my cup and let the steam fog my glasses, a gentle reminder that clarity sometimes needs a wipe and a breath. The climax settled in the room, her threat now our proof. Mid-morning, Keir Holiday called from the apartment. I used to fund his voice thin with a panic that hadn't learned manners. Debt collectors came by. They asked about wages, assets, everything. I listened the way mothers do when the child is 30, but the storm inside him is 12. That's what unpaid loans do, I said even. They look for answers. He wanted a shortcut. I offered a roadmap contact. Tamsin Webb set up a plan, tell the truth. Older adults will recognize this pivot the moment you stop cushioning and start coaching. I don't know how it got this bad, he whispered. I did. Saying it wouldn't help. The climax arrived without volume. The consequences he'd postponed had learned his address. Later, Keir Holiday lowered his voice, like confession belongs in a whisper. She told me it was medical debt, he said, meaning Sabine Crowell. The word told did heavy lifting. I heard the scrape of a chair, the sound of a man trying to rearrange the past into something that doesn't hurt. I see, I said, because sometimes the kindest sentence is the shortest one. If it's medical, have Dr. Taylor's office call me. I'll pay them directly. Silence pressed its palm against the phone. Older adults know this silence when the claim can't walk into a clinic without losing its shoes. I need to go, he muttered. Take care, I answered, and wrote the time beside a single phrase. Narrative failing. The climax stayed gentle. Truth didn't slam the door. It let the lie trip over the threshold by itself. By afternoon, Elliot Vance rang voice, weighed down by the part of leadership no one advertises. I have to let Keir Holiday go, he said. Too much noise. Customers are uncomfortable. We run on trust here. He didn't ask me to bless the decision. He offered me the respect of context. I understand, I replied. I'm sorry it came to your counter. Older listeners know what that costs on both sides. The goodbye that protects the room while wounding the person. For what it's worth, Elliot Vance added. I hope he finds his feet without stepping on yours. After the call, I stood at the sink and watched water bead collect and run a small science experiment about how pressure finds a path. The climax landed soft, a door closed to keep a business whole. Evening delivered the paper, the mail, and Deputy Cal Morrow at Sabine Crowell's door with a restraining order. An hour later, Gus Calhoun called from the manor desk. She tried to get past the front again. He said the line clipped. Security reminded her. Cameras recorded it. Detective Delaney Kincaid logged the violation. Consequences aren't dramatic when systems are awake. They're procedural. Older adults will appreciate the peace of that no grand confrontation, just a line drawn and a supervisor watching it. I sat with the certified copy and traced the seal with a finger like a rubric for breathing. The climax was simple geometry. She moved closer. The law moved closer than that. The next day, 2 messages arrived through relatives of relatives, offers to talk it out, to settle, to help with a little cash until payday. I answered none of them. Instead, I wrote myself a policy and read it aloud so it would stick. I support truth. I do not subsidize lies. Then I made coffee and poured it into the good cup, the one with a tiny chip that doesn't leak, proof that flaws and strength coexist just fine. Keir Holiday texted. Can we meet? I replied. Yes, without Sabine Crowell. Public place. Bring facts. Older adults know the difference between a bridge and a plank. A bridge holds 2 people crossing toward each other. A plank is for walking off. The climax gathered itself like weather. I would help him face forward, but I would not pay for either of them to keep walking backward. We met at a quiet booth where the coffee is strong and the chairs don't wobble. Keir Holiday arrived early, shoulders rounded the way. Boys carry trouble when they grow into men. I folded my hands so they wouldn't shake with old habits. This is your last offer, I said. Public truth, not private promises. He searched my face like there might be a shortcut hidden in the lines time gave me. Older folks will understand the urge to rescue hums in your bones, even when you've sworn you're done. I kept my voice level. No money, no more stories. You fix this in daylight, or you carry it alone. He nodded, then looked away, then nodded again. The choreography of a man choosing between pride and oxygen. I slid a small list across the table, or when what to say. He didn't touch it yet. The waitress refilled our cups without asking. The climax sat between us like a third-place setting. Truth or nothing. I read the terms out loud, so there would be no debate later. First, speak at church during sharing time. Second, submit a letter to the Millfield Tribune, numbers included. Third, post the same confession on your social page. No vague words, no half facts. You name what I paid: tuition, wedding rent, utilities, phones. Keir Holiday closed his eyes as if numbers could sting. They will, I said, and then the sting will end. Older listeners know this medicine. The dose hurts before it heals. He asked, do I get to explain why? Yes, but you don't get to blur what. The difference mattered. I slid a pen across the table. He didn't sign anything. He wasn't 10. He did something better. He looked me in the eye and said, I'll do it. Commitments spoken slowly hold. The waitress set down a check we didn't fight over the way peace sometimes arrives, plain ordinary, and exactly on time. He finally asked the question he'd circled since we sat down. What about the apartment? I didn't make him wait. It's being transferred to the women's shelter, coordinated by Talia Santoro. The words landed like a bell clear final. Keir Holiday looked startled, then young, then something like relieved. Older adults know that look. When you take inheritance off the table, love gets its own chair. You're giving it away, he whispered. I'm giving it back, I said, to people who use homes like lifeboats, not trophies. He stared at the tabletop map of coffee rings as if reading tides. Does that mean it means any distance between us won't be measured in square footage? We sat with it, both of us, hearing all the years I'd spent, hoping he'd choose me without being bought. The climax was quiet but complete. The house wasn't the prize anymore. The relationship would have to be. We took a slow walk to the parking lot, and I told him why. Some gifts come with an invoice stamped later. I've paid that bill for 8 months. Talia Santoro had shown me a wait list of mothers and kids sleeping in cars. Legacy isn't furniture, I said. It's what your children say about you when they're safe. Older folks will understand the turn we give differently after we've been taken for granted. He kept pace hands in pockets the way he used to when we'd talk after dinner, and he wasn't yet borrowing my future, so this is permanent. Keir Holiday asked, voice careful. Yes, I didn't add apologies. If we heal, it won't be because Elise made us behave. He nodded, absorbing the shape of a world with no fallback couch. The climax wasn't a door slamming, it was a bridge lowering for strangers who needed it. More than we needed a story. We stopped by the curb where the paint has given up pretending to be fresh. I'm sorry, Keir Holiday said the words thin from overuse in other rooms. I touched his sleeve so the moment wouldn't harden. Sorry is a doorbell, I told him. Action is walking in and doing the work. He swallowed, then answered like a man who finally understands admission is the floor, not the ceiling. What does action look like? Say it out loud. Pay what you owe. Show up without her. Start counseling. Keep records. Older listeners will recognize the checklist. It's how we forgive without cheapening the word. He nodded once, then twice, as if fastening something stubborn. And if I fail, then you try again, and stop calling failure your personality. The climax landed on the simplest sentence we had. See you Sunday. We both heard the next line we didn't say. Only if you mean it. I called Reverend Hollis Crane from the church parking lot, where gravel remembers every funeral and every picnic. He listened without rushing, which is the first miracle any pastor can offer. We can give him 3 minutes, Reverend Hollis Crane said. Long enough to be honest, short enough to be brave. He asked if I needed anything. A sturdy chair, I joked, and a little silence on either side. He chuckled, then turned serious. Repentance is public when harm was public. Older adults know that math. We've sat through both kinds and remember which one changed anything. He offered to stand nearby, not as a shield, but as a witness. We'll keep it gentle, he said, and true. We prayed brief and plain. After the amen, the parking lot seemed brighter, like someone had turned a switch that was always there. The climax waited on a wooden lectern, polished by years of hands trying to do better. Sunday, the sanctuary smelled like lilies and old wood. Keir Holiday walked the aisle slower than most grooms and faster than most pallbearers, and somehow that felt exactly right. He gripped the podium and read the numbers without decoration. 15,000 for school, 8,000 for a wedding. 8 months of rent, utilities, and phones. He named Sabine Crowell's demands and his silence. Older folks watched without flinching. We've paid our own tallies. We know the currency. He didn't cry for show. He paused to breathe so he could keep going. I chose comfort over character, he said. I asked my mother to disappear in a home she financed. The words settled like dust after a hard sweep, visible, necessary. No music swelled. No one clapped. The climax was the quiet that follows truth when a room decides to make space for it. He stepped down lighter than he'd walked up, That's how burdens leave by ounces, not applause. Reverend Hollis Crane closed his Bible and spoke to the congregation that had raised casseroles and kids in equal measure. Dignity under pressure, he said softly. We've been given a live example. He didn't point at me. He pointed at the principle, which is kinder. Older listeners know the mercy of that being honored without being displayed. People approached in clusters, hugs that didn't squeeze hands, that didn't hold on too long. Rhea Donnelly pressed a tissue into my palm like a medal. At the door, Nate Arbogast murmured, "You set a boundary we should all learn. No speeches, no scolding, just a town deciding who it believes by how it behaves around you after." The climax wasn't triumph, it was relief with its shoes off. Truth had a chair, and so did I. When I reached my car, I sat a minute and let the silence count to 10 for me. Then I turned the key. By midweek, Detective Delaney Kincaid called with an update. Sabine Crowell hasn't answered service attempts on additional inquiries, she said. Looks like she's left town. We'll keep the case open. I pictured a trunk packed at night, a rearview mirror that refuses to show what you don't admit. Older adults know that departure, how some people choose miles over mending. If she resurfaces, we'll be ready. Detective Delaney Kincaid assured me. I thanked her for treating my years as assets, not vulnerabilities. After the call, I walked the length of my small living room and measured peace in steps. 7 across 5 down one window you can open without asking anyone. The climax didn't cheer, it exhaled. You can love someone and still be grateful when their shadow leaves your doorway. On Friday, the shelter's lobby buzzed with crayons and careful hope. Talia Santoro met me by a bulletin board, crowded with first names and appointment times. I placed a ring of keys into her palm. From a bridge that broke me, I said to a bridge that holds others. She nodded, eyes shining the way buildings do when they find their purpose. We stepped outside where a simple sign read, "Transitional housing letters, straight as spines." A child waved from a window someone else used to call mine. Older listeners will understand generosity feels different when it's aimed at need-not noise. Talia Santoro promised regular updates, not plaques, not photos. Just the news that rooms were full of breathing and bedtime. The climax was the click of a lock from the right side. The sound every safe place makes when it welcomes instead of warns. I moved into a small place by the lake, 2 chairs, 1 good pan, and a view that changes politely with the hour. The evenings carry a soft hush, the kind houses learn when they're used for resting, not proving. I keep the restraining order in a folder by the phone, not because I live in fear, but because I live prepared. Keir Holiday sent a picture of a counseling receipt and a schedule for extra shifts somewhere new. No speeches, just paperwork and follow through the love language of adults. Older folks will nod here. Peace has chores. You do them and peace stays. I fold laundry water, a stubborn fern, and let the radio play songs that remember my name. The climax isn't dramatic, it's stable. A loon calls across the water. I answer with my own ordinary sound, the kettle clicking off the cup. Set down, the window open just enough to invite in a kinder weather. Morning sun warmed the porch rail while I lined up note cards and a good pen. I started with the easy names, Rhea Donnelly for truth, told gently Nate. Arbogast for fairness at the counter, Detective Delaney Kincaid for treating my years as proof not doubt. Older folks will understand the comfort of handwriting. It slows the blood and keeps the mind from galloping. I wrote what I wish someone had told me months ago. You steadied me without spending me. To Gus Calhoun, I added, your camera honored what my voice could not carry alone. Each card closed with gratitude that didn't sound like a ledger. Between sentences, I watched a squirrel argue with the bird feeder and smiled at the small, ordinary debates that don't break anyone's heart. When the stack was done, I sealed the envelopes and set them in a neat tower. The climax was quiet. My thanks had addresses now, and every address meant I wasn't standing alone. By lunchtime, a chime from my phone carried a message from Rhea Donnelly. People know the real story. She added a row of hearts that embarrassed us both and made me laugh. At Miller's Diner, Sloan Mercer told a customer. She handled it with dignity, and the customer nodded. Like a verdict reached without shouting. We all know how towns work. The same porch that heard gossip now hosted apologies baked into pies. I walked Main Street and felt the air change in increments. Fewer glances that asked questions I didn't owe, more nods that meant we've recalibrated. Older listeners will recognize that relief. You don't have to narrate yourself anymore. Mrs. Aveline Cho passed me in the parking lot and squeezed my hand. Good woman, she said, which is how church folk award medals. The climax landed in a single ordinary kindness. A stranger held the door, and no one insisted I prove which story was true. That evening, Mrs. Aveline Cho called between choir practice and batter mixing. We're taking a love offering for the shelter, she said. All voluntary, no fanfare. I pictured Reverend Hollis Crane counting quiet gifts after service, folding them like handkerchiefs. Talia Santoro sent me a photo of the shelter pantry before shot that looked like a cupboard during college and an after shot that looked like a holiday. Older adults have filled pantries and passed plates all our lives. We know the difference between charity that shows off and charity that shows up. No plaques, I told Talia Santoro. Just groceries and rent help when the month runs long. She texted back a simple amen. The climax didn't sparkle. It stacked cans on shelves, names on a waiting list. Eased lights kept on for another week. I brewed tea and thought about how relief moves through a town like yeast, quiet patient, lifting everything it touches. I pulled on gloves and visited the stubborn patch by the fence. Weeds make the same argument every spring. If you leave us alone, we'll take everything. Older folks know that tone. It sounds like certain phone calls. As I knelt, I weighed generosity versus indulgence, the way you weigh soil in your palm. Some plants thrive with pruning. Some die when you ignore the trimming they need. I tossed crabgrass into a bucket and remembered how often I'd called indulgence kindness because it kept peace for 15 minutes. In the distance, a child laughed at something small and honest. I pressed a new root into a hole and firmed the earth, the way nurses tuck blankets snug, not smothering. The climax arrived in a sentence I said out loud to the peppermint growth. Isn't mercy if it strangles? I stood, brushed my knees, and felt the afternoon decide to be gentle again. Boundaries looked better in sunlight. Near dusk, a text blinked from Keir Holiday, a photo of a counseling appointment. Card, first session done, second scheduled. I'm learning, I called rescue. What was really control, he wrote. Older listeners know the humility it takes to write that sentence. He didn't ask for money. He asked for room to keep going. One action at a time, I replied, echoing the only rule I trust anymore. He added a screenshot of a payment plan email with Tamsin Webb at the credit union dates, amounts no drama. A small, unexpected swelling pride's quieter cousin rose in my chest. I set the phone down and let the moment be exactly as big as it deserved. Not bigger. The climax wasn't a promise. It was a proof, a calendar square. Filled in a call, answered a task completed. The next right thing doesn't glitter. It lives on paper, shows up on time, and lets the next right thing follow it. I texted back coffee this Saturday, then added the terms before the invitation could grow assumptions. Public place, 1 hour, no requests for cash. We talk about steps, not stories. Keir Holiday responded. Understood, which might be the most beautiful word in the English language when you've been misunderstood on purpose. Older adults will recognize this boundary, kind, firm, protective of the peace you paid for in installments. I chose a booth by the window where the light is honest and the napkins don't pretend to be linen. In my notebook, I drew 2 columns. Progress made progress needed. Beneath made, I wrote, counseling creditor's confession. Beneath needed, I wrote consistency, community consequences accepted without bargaining. The climax settled in like a good chair. I could meet the man I raised without meeting the bill he brought. That's what boundaries buy you a visit. without a collection plate disguised as conversation. At the shelter, crayons rolled across a low table, while Talia Santoro walked me through intake notes. 3 families moved and 2 moms found jobs. 1 child slept through the night for the first time in months. The pantry donation bridged a gap, Talia Santoro said, tapping a ledger where generosity met arithmetic. We toured a freshly painted room. The walls still smelled like new chances. A little girl waved with both hands. I waved back with both of mine because some moments ask for symmetry. Older listeners know the lift of seeing money become meals instead of resentments. We stood by the door where a simple corkboard held flyers for budgeting classes and babysitting swaps. "We'll send monthly updates," Talia Santoro added. "No pressure, just proof." The climax clicked at the simplest sound, a key turning from the inside. Safety makes a different echo than secrecy. I closed my eyes and let the difference settle. The next day, Keir Holiday arrived with a small stack, a copy of his letter printed in the Millfield Tribune, time-stamped and humbling. A screenshot of his public post comments, full of older names we both recognized. Proud of this step, hard truth, good man. He didn't fish for praise. He pointed to the lines that cost him and said I left them in. We sat at the kitchen table I bought secondhand and made new with polish and patience. Older adults know that trick claim a surface and give it a purpose. He outlined a plan to call Elliot Vance for a reference and apply where his name could be rinsed clean by steady work. I listened, and the listening did not hurt. The climax sat plainly in front of us. The story that once required my wallet could now stand on its own legs, even if they wobbled. Wobbling counts. Infants and recoveries prove it. That evening, I stood in the hallway of memory and watched the day I left replay without bitterness. The door didn't slam. It sealed. Older folks will understand the difference. Slamming scares, sealing holds. On my desk lay the restraining order, the shelter receipt, and Reverend Hollis Crane's sermon note clipped to a program, Dignity Under Pressure. I thought about all the years I paid so others wouldn't feel gravity, and how gravity became the teacher they needed once I stepped aside. Somewhere across town, Rhea Donnelly wiped a counter, and a young couple tipped without drama. I smiled at that math. The climax was a sentence I finally believed. Without rehearsing, I can love people and still tell the truth about what love isn't. I turned off the lamp, let the room darken like a theater that knows it has earned the quiet, and walked toward sleep that didn't ask me to pay for it. Sunday afternoon carried the smell of cut grass and distant barbecue. I brewed tea and opened the lake window just enough to hear the water take its time. Ducks threaded a line through the ripples like a seamstress who never hurries. Older adults know the sacredness of an unremarkable day after months that insisted on being memorable. My phone stayed face down, not as a statement, just as a choice. Somewhere Detective Delaney Kincaid filed another update. Somewhere Talia Santoro matched a donor to a need. Somewhere Keir Holiday sat in a circle of metal folding chairs and told the truth again. I watched a cloud drift like it had nowhere to be, and felt that rightness in my ribs. The climax didn't need a drum roll. It needed a breath I didn't measure. The tea cooled, the window held the breeze. Peace asked for nothing and got everything it wanted. On Thursday, I texted Keir Holiday, Saturday 9 a.m., the old booth. He replied, "I'll be there," and then he was 2 minutes early, jacket pressed, shoulders squared. Older listeners know the beauty of punctuality. It's the courtesy that says, "Your time matters to me." We ordered coffee and nothing else, which used to feel empty and now felt full. He slid a small notebook across the table budget, on one page schedule, on the next receipts tucked like bookmarks. No speeches. We compared notes like teammates who finally understood the playbook. When the hour ended, he asked, "Same time next week?" "Yes," I said, "as long as the paper keeps up with the promises." He nodded, grinned the way he did when he was 8, and built a tower that didn't fall. The climax was simple as a handshake. We left separately, walked into our own mornings, and kept what we'd agreed to keep the appointment and the work. People think I left behind an apartment, but what I really left behind was a habit saying yes when the answer was no. When I stopped paying off debt, I didn't abandon my family. I cut off the lie that lived off it. Paperwork became my anchor. The law created space for security. A small town carried the truth the rest of the way. Handing over those keys to the women's shelter ended expectations of inheritance and opened rooms for survivors who needed a door that could be locked from the inside. My son chose daylight over comfort. Trust between us now grows little by little through each bill, each appointment kept on time. If this story resonates with something in you, stand firm in the stance you're avoiding and put your love where it helps. Tell me about the voice that nurtured you, the one you still hear when you have to be brave. I'm Thora Quinlan, and this is my story. If it touches your heart, please share it and stay tuned for the next one. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel